CNBC TV18 Moneycontrol, New Horizon 2.0, presented by GE.
Hello and welcome to GE Presents New Horizons 2.0 in association with Moneycontrol. I'm your host, Paramita Chatterjee. Now, from being a laggard in tech adoption, India's healthcare sector is digitizing and innovating at an accelerated pace. And credit has to be given to the pandemic, which really exposed our glaring healthcare gaps. But thanks to increasing internet and smartphone penetration and government initiatives like the National Digital Health Mission and Make in India, we were witnessing and we have been witnessing a seismic shift in the way we perceive and receive healthcare. Consequently, with technology penetrating the farthest reaches of our country, patients in rural and urban areas alike are now able to access affordable and quality healthcare. New age technologies like AI, robotics are improving accuracy and enabling precise diagnosis as well as remote treatment. So addressing this tectonic shift that India's healthcare sector is currently witnessing, GE Healthcare's New Horizon 2.0 webinar will focus on how India can emerge as a global hub for manufacturing of medical devices and how health tech inevitably will optimize all healthcare practices, enhance patient-doctor communication, and improve patient outcomes with precision at the core of care. In our first discussion today, we are focusing on making India a global medtech hub. Now, India is the fourth largest market for medical devices in Asia amongst the top 20 markets globally and has the potential to grow even further. So it's time for us to take the lead in the medical devices sector. We have the strength of skilled manpower, ease of business through industry-friendly rules, as well as a huge domestic market. In fact, the current market for medical devices is estimated at $11 billion. And the medical device industry is the highest amongst all sectors in the healthcare market in terms of growth. And it's also beginning to be boosted by special schemes like the Departmental Production Linked Incentive Scheme for medical devices, along with the establishment of 4 medical device parks across the country. And the Department of Pharmaceuticals is also bringing out an India medical devices policy. So a lot of policy initiatives are being undertaken to make sure that India is set on the path to become a global hub for medical devices. And to discuss all of that and more, the potential in this market and what more needs to be done, we have with us a lineup of panelists, starting with Dr. Shravan Subramaniam, Managing Director, Wipro GE Healthcare; Dr. Sahajanand Prasad Singh, President, Indian Medical Association; Sunil Khurana, CEO and MD, BPL Medical Devices Limited; Girish Krishnamurthy, MD and CEO, Tata Medical and Diagnostics Limited. Thank you so much for joining us on the show and really trying to explore medical devices industry and what lies ahead. Dr. Shravan Subramaniam, let me start with you. And in terms of the potential, of course, as far as the medical devices industry is concerned, India is seen as being positioned in a particularly sweet spot when it comes to cost advantages. There's also the draft National Medical Devices Policy, which is laying out a clearer roadmap because there have been some policy concerns in the past. And exports are poised to reach about $10 billion by 2025. But we can't take away from the fact that imports are still a very large part of the medical devices industry that we see in India. In fact, almost 80% of the devices are currently imported. So how soon and what more do you think is required in order for India to emerge as one of the top 5 medical devices manufacturers in the world today?
Paramita, thank you so much. This is a good question. And in order to talk about the future, I should address a little bit about what's been happening in the past. And that will give you a sense that we are at an inflection point. I was just speaking to some experts in the industry a short while ago, and they were telling me how, 25, 30 years ago, it was quite a struggle to establish medical device framework across India. Importing products was onerous, getting a loan sanctioned was very challenging. Today, we have a lot of schemes that make it easier for us to function in the environment. As you called out earlier, we have the production incentive, which is encouraging medical technology manufacturing. plants in the country. But really what it takes is for the whole ecosystem to really come to the next level, right? And for that, I'm talking about the healthcare ecosystem. And we're seeing that. We've seen that just in the last 2-3 years, thanks to COVID, healthcare infrastructure has expanded significantly. And it's not just the major cities, but also the smaller towns, the tier 2 locations, as we call them. They are also seeing a lot of activity in healthcare infrastructure. Next, we need to think about skills, right? It's not enough if we just invest in infrastructure, but do we have the skills and the capabilities that are required to put these sophisticated products together? Third, you consider the advantages that India has in addition to medical devices, which is very elaborate IT infrastructure and our talent. At Wipro GE, for example, we have about 1,800 engineers that are developing products, not only in India for India, but in India for the world. So really, Paramita, the entire ecosystem needs to come together. And once all these pieces are put together, you'll start seeing some growth above what we've seen the last couple of decades. And in order to do what you were speaking about, 80% of products are imported at this point. At Wipro G, it's probably a lot less. But as a country, as we move forward, I think India has a lot of potential to manufacture locally for country as well as export.
Indeed. And as you said, Shravan, this is the need of the hour. And I think post-pandemic, we really understand the need and the urgency for accessibility to healthcare, especially because medical devices form such a large part of it. In fact, let me bring in the Indian Medical Association. We have the president with us, Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh, we heard from Dr. Shravan about some of the factors which are required. What else do you see as being, key points that need to be enabled in order for us to really see that kind of growth potential in this industry?
In India, it is very much essential to make a new medical devices. It's very much essential at the time of pandemic, very useful. Those who have made these devices for the patients are very useful. So this Dr. Mr. Sunil Khurana's company is very good company, as we know, and it's MRI and all these scans, so all are very good. So India will be a very hub of this medical profession very soon. So in this country, we are very much alert, and the medical industries are making so much of this medical devices for this country. For the medical devices, we have to make newer and newer, so that India becoming independent of the medical devices. Thank you.
Indeed, and independence is something that is required, especially as we saw we had to import so many devices. We still need to, but there's so many companies and partnerships. We have some of them here with us who are trying to make sure that India is more self-reliant, and we see that kind of growth. And one of them is BPL Medical Devices. Let's go across to Sunil Khurana and understand from him, because Mr. Khurana, your company has really been trying to bring across that kind of Atmanirbharta or self-reliance when it comes to medical devices. Take us through at this point in time, how do policies like the National Medical Device Promotion Council, which is being recently reconstituted under the Department of Pharmaceuticals, how do you think measures such as this will really help players such as yourself to realize the full potential and meet the kind of demand that we see in our country?
Thanks, Paramita. This is quite interesting question, and we all know that NMDPC is a very newly formed body. I see a couple of opportunities, objectives, and challenges with them. So how I look at it, that they must be struggling that why FDI, which was 100% through special route, why has that not picked up? What are the issues? How to maximize the funding? That could be one their big issue. What I want to also tell, and they clearly understand, between pharma and medical devices, these are two completely different streams. I mean, when we talk only medical device, it itself is so complex that you start from sutures and syringes or gloves and go up to ECGs, patient monitor, C-arms, CT, MR, PET CT, cyclotron, linear accelerator, such complex product. So it's a very different space as compared to pharma. That's a one differentiation one has to clearly understand. And as they move forward, they have to actually address the gaps. And those gaps are today regulatory frameworks in my mind. And there has to be clearly a new vertical which needs to be created under Ministry of Health. I mean, that will actually fuel it. That's how I look at it. Because it cannot be on very long term a part of only pharma if we want to become in next 20 years $100 billion business, which is easy. Only 30% cumulative growth can take us to that level. But there has to be a very focused department who drives under probably medical health ministry. Like we know that we have for even food, we have a different body. We have pharma as a different body. This needs to be third body. So I guess these are the areas they need to come and address, and not under the lens of pharma only. Another point which I want to say, it's very good news that entire world is looking at China plus one. I mean, we all know that most countries are looking at some alternative where they can also set up next factories, next establishments. And I think India must grab that chance. And we need to really work very, very closely. An ecosystem, as Shraman some time back said, is very key. One is that we build an ecosystem within our own system. But think of 30 years back when Maruti came, how ecosystem got created around it. Because unless you have those ecosystems being built, it is very difficult. Government of India has done a fabulous job of bringing the PLI here. They have done a phenomenal job of launching 4 or 5 med device parks. I've been to most of them. AP Medical Technology is awesome, probably one of the finest I've witnessed across the globe. So there are a lot of things happening, but step by step we need to address. That's how I look at it.
Really, and link up all those elements in the chain, as you're saying, to create a viable ecosystem. Because Mr. Krishnamurthy, how do you respond to some of the points raised by Sunil Khurana, especially when it comes to partnerships, bringing in FDI? Because what we've seen is also a very unequal spread when it comes to accessibility of healthcare. Today, most of it is concentrated in urban cities, and including access to medical devices such as CTs and MRIs and so on. And whereas, a lot of the demand is actually in the rural area. How can we really bridge this gap? I mean, your company has so many collaborations at the forefront. How can that really help in bridging some of these gaps within the healthcare system?
So let me first, from the medical device and diagnostics perspective, let us look at the access problem in 2 dimensions. That's why I look at it. Number one, the disease portfolio of India is little different compared to a lot of global footprint. See, today's India's biggest problem is some of the key diseases like TB and HPV kind of diseases. While we have a huge disease burden in lifestyle diseases like diabetic, cardiovascular diseases, and various other diseases like thyroid and PCOD, all of it. So while looking at the access and the device, one parameter which we can look at it as the disease pattern. What is the disease burden of this country? How does it play? Then, as you rightly said, the next part which comes in, predominantly the current access and availability is in the cities, we would say, where most of our establishment, which is the tertiary care hospitals, where either tertiary care diagnostic center, tertiary care hospitals, which predominantly provides the access to these kind of devices. Whereas our biggest problem is, let's say, for example, cancer, if you take, the major disease burden of our country in cancer would come in oral and breast. And everybody knows diagnosing cancer very early, which solves a lot of our problem. How do you diagnose it if you don't do it close to the patient in a primary care and secondary care setting? That means the only way that can happen is to build the access in a way where you economically viable product which comes to close to patient. It could not be like a very high quality and highly expensive equipment like the tertiary care hospital. Looking at miniaturized point of care, close to patient, quick diagnosis kind of scenario, which can bring down this, really create an access better. So we have tried this from Tata Group on a different model by integrating a lot of primary care and secondary care in public institutions. And in fact, our group chairman wrote a book called Digital Nation, which is essentially India's big problem, two big problem as a country. Whether you take healthcare or education, we have a huge issue for access. Similarly, we have a very large demand. So bringing the demand and access together, developing a technology digital bridge, we call as a Bridgital, and which is what the model which we experimented close to about 4 million people in India. And really, it's a very scalable model. So in summary, I would say that, our medical devices need to really look into what is India's problem, both economic as well as disease or a healthcare burden perspective, and devise a plan to do it so that the access can be really multiplied. Because unless we solve the access problem,
I think what Mr. Krishnamurthy also is required for going by what you're saying is a lot of perhaps devices, since we're talking about medical devices, which are made for the health profile of patients here in our country, because we have such a unique sort of demographic when it comes to our patients and really where they are located. Let me bring in, go back to Dr. Shravan and, respond to some of the points you've heard, and also an additional question here in terms of the kind of talent, because it is said that one of the key reasons why perhaps we can see a lot of manufacturing and companies being attracted here to our country are initiatives under the Ayushman Bharat Yojana and the Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, which has actually led to more investments into medical colleges and talent, which is very hard to come by. Do you think, these kind of initiatives can really, sort of satisfy the demand which is there to hire some of this talent to make some of these devices we're talking about?
Ramita, you asked a couple of good questions there on cost and access. I'll address those first and then come to talent. I think Girish sort of nailed it there when he said that we have to consider the local framework, the local patient population, their affordability, and the disease profile. We have, to the government's credit, the health policy that was released about 5 years ago. Of course, that got temporarily, the direction changed during COVID, but now we're back on track talking about non-communicable diseases, while we're still trying to battle some of the communicable diseases, malaria, tuberculosis, etc., that have been a part of us for many years. When you talk about non-communicable diseases, cancer, cardiovascular care, women's health, these are all very critical areas where we need to invest our infrastructure and our care towards these patients. Our population is aging. We're hitting 1.4 billion in overall population, and our average age has gone up, and our life expectancy at birth has gone up. So we're going to see a lot of people hitting the 60, 65, 70 plus mark, and they are going to require a lot of care. Now, we can't offer the exact same kind of products or the same kind of service and care that is offered in other countries, because the attributes are different, the affordability is different. So what are some ways to do it? One is through frugal innovation. We look at products which are affordable for the Indian market. That could either be through taking a product from an advanced or sophisticated market and then removing some of the frills and putting it to use here. Or what we have done is to devise from scratch, based on the attributes that are required for the market. It could be, better heat resistance, or being able to operate a product under conditions of humidity or dust, and make them more adaptable for the Indian market. The other point I keep hearing about is cost, and here I want to make a distinction. What does cost mean? Are we talking about the cost of a product, or the device, or are we talking of the cost of treatment and clinical outcomes? And I think this is where, if we're talking about coming together as an ecosystem, we need to define what is the cost per outcome. And so if you're treating, for example, a cardiovascular incident, what was it costing 5 years ago versus what is it costing now versus 5 years later? And what role do pharmaceuticals have to play, do hospitals have to play, and medical devices have to play? We might have some sophisticated products which are, which may appear expensive, but if they can scale up and offer service to hundreds or thousands of patients, then that cost gets defrayed over time. So that is one way to look at cost. And access is a much bigger picture than cost. Cost is one part of it. The other is logistics. How do I get a product to every nook and corner? And my colleagues on the screen, I'm so proud to be associated with them because they have devised products that are available in every corner of the market. And we are striving to do that. So what are a couple of attributes that allow us to get a product out? One is technology and the other is skill. So now coming to that other question that you asked, Paramita, this is a challenge for us because as the market is growing, as our technologies are improving, we need to have the right skill, the right talent to do so. At Wipro GE, we are of course investing a tremendous amount on upskilling, not just our own faculty, but also upskilling people across the industry because, like I said, everybody needs to succeed in order for us to succeed.
Indeed, and very well put, Dr. Shravan. In fact, let me take this across to the other manufacturer. We have the homegrown manufacturer, that's Sunil Khurana of BPL. Mr. Khurana, is accessing talent one of your key challenges? What would you put down as one of your key challenges? Would you say it's keeping the cost down? Is it accessing talent? Are some of the new initiatives which have been undertaken by the government, for instance, helping you in either of these two areas?
I want to just divide this question into two spaces. I mean, companies like us have a first challenge is technology. Like Shravan said, Shravan has a parent company which is G Healthcare in US, or someone coming from Medtronic or Philips or other companies. They have the technology and they have to bring it here to start the manufacturing. In our case, we have to first build the technology. So that's the first challenge we have. And we need a lot of government support there. We are also doing a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm very proud to say here that during the COVID, when there was a technology needed to build an oxygen concentrator, it was only BPL Medical who had the technology, and we shared that technology to Bharat Electronics Limited. They started making a mass production. So I'm happy that some we have, but it is not that we have everything. So technology is one where government can play a big role, and I will just come later. Second is that coming on the skill side, I mean, there is no method. If you look at today engineering colleges, most of the students want to go to IT industry. But how many of them want to come for the manufacturing side? So this is the one area where a lot of aggressive move has to happen, and government and industry has to work together. How can we create attractiveness for them? How can we build a better manufacturing career for them? It is not only IT or creating an app. They have to get into the main in this area. So this is the one area which I feel is hard pressing today. But I'm also happy that when we look at the other side, which is paramedics, which is clinicians, I mean, government has done a wonderful job. Most of the states now have sanctioned many medical colleges to build more and more clinicians. Many new institutes are coming up to make the paramedics. I mean, AP Medical Technology, which is at Kalam Institute, or even Symbiosis. They have a wonderful curriculum, and we are creating it. Because what we realize, during the period of COVID, we somehow could manage to bring products. There were very few takers, very few trained people to use those products on the patient. So it's a both side. It is a side toward the clinical side users as well as to make the product. So, but we should not look at this as a very short-term solution. It will never happen in a short term. We should look at this as a 5 to 10 years, because industries are not made in an overnight way. So slowly we will grow, but there are lots and lots of initiatives happening, which in my view, in few years will really ease out on these areas.
Indeed. And let's bring up one of those points, and let me go across to Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh, do you think the measures that have been taken, for instance, to set up medical device parks in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, that will really bring in the kind of investment which is required, along with it, the technology which is also required in this particular market? Do you think enough is being done there?
It is essential for the investment in medical devices. But it is not should be costly, because India government or state government has to open many medical colleges, then it needs many medical devices. So that's not should be very costly. And Telangana and this Andhra people are making so much of this medical devices. So from our part of the country, we are very much should be alert to make these medical devices, and that not should be costly, because we have to spread all part of the country, in all the district level, we are opening medical colleges. So in medical college, we need many medical devices for the patients. But cost, that not so big cost.
Okay, since we're talking so much about cost, Girish Krishnamurthy, bring in your thoughts here, because how can Made in India really reduce the costs of some of these medical devices and make healthcare more affordable?
So when it comes to, let us make a very clear-cut thought process, what needs to be done made in India, what is to be done in make in India. And I feel current scheme of things, the way the medtech industries looks, and especially in the medical devices space, it's very important that we need to go on both the streams. Now, when you look at the made in India aspect of it, when you look at a medical device, the core aspect is science over there, science and technology. So what is happening or what has been happening in India over a period of last 20 years, we have great scientists, we create science, we do experiment in our lab, publish papers and journals. There we stop it, but making it into a product was seldom in India. Now there's a lot of traction, and suddenly I believe that India has enough scientific power to really make product made in India, and especially on the science aspect of it. And if you look at the second aspect of made in India, or anything which you need to manufacture in India, which is various other engineering and technology aspect of it, which is your instrumentations, electronics, and all other part of it, which I feel Western world is already in a very mature state. A lot of things we don't need to reinvent this. We can bring it in India, like Sunil mentioned about GE, Medtronics, and all of it. They're all mastered this aspect of it. So we don't need to reinvent it. We can do it on a make in India mode into this. Now, clearly, when you want to bring in a cost advantage here, if you really look at only the labor arbitrage is going to bring you cost advantage, what we noticed in last 20 years in China, that is not going to be a game changer. India has the potential to really create IP, protect IP for Indian companies, and also protect IP for the international companies. Given the new medical devices policy is coming up very clearly, and as Sunil mentioned about, if we create a clear focus group within the regulatory framework for medical devices, within the whichever ministry it is under health ministry, if you want to create a sub-ministry for medical devices, or whatever the method government feels it, but it requires a real focus, then the ability to manufacture most economical and high quality product, India scores better. And I'm not going to say it's going to happen very soon, but it might take another 3 to 5 years for us to master it to the level Korea and few other countries have come up to this space. And certainly India has an opportunity. But I want to make a closing comment on this, which is, if you look at medical devices and medtech industries today, it is in a very nascent stage. It reminds me that how in 1980s the IT industry was. So there's a lot of legroom. There's a lot of future is there in this space. So it's just a beginning, and we need to have a very strong fight to build the fundamentals, which is science and technology. Then we can always deal with the cost easily.
Okay. Mr. Khurana, I want you to respond to some of these points about costs when it comes to a manufacturer. Recently there have been some moves that have been made by the government where critical care equipment and medical devices have been put under the list of essential medicines. How do you respond as a manufacturer to some of these moves?
So these are good moves. Ultimately, what we are trying to do, or what government is trying to do, to bring the affordable health to patient. If cost of devices are less, it straight away gets transferred. But it cannot be done straight away. Probably for products which are A and B class, which is basically more into a low technology. So we should divide between low technology, medium technology, and high technology area. So low technology, which is more like a consumables and all, that we should bring a price, some kind of price regulation. And there's no point of having a cost of something which gets made for 20 lakh rupees, finally MRP is 500. That is absolutely wrong. So we need to bring probably some methodology that whether we go to the BOM, bill of material, and allow certain multiplier. That's a one way to look at it. Or if it is coming from outside, the moment it lands to custom, we should see that cost versus the factory cost in India. That's the right approach to look at it. But between 2 to 4 times of cost can be probably given as MRP, not 10, 20, 30 times. So this is one. But look at the complex products. If I'm talking of patient monitoring, or I'm talking of ultrasounds or CTs and those products, which is class C and D product, it's very, very hard to put any cost consideration there, because future R&D is very, very critical. It will get disrupted. Just think today in an ICU, think of an ICU where you have a patient monitoring, ventilator, syringe pump. So today's method is that you do a reverse engineering or frugal engineering, what Shravan said some time back. I mean, you make a product and start it functioning. But after some time, I mean, very soon, not sometime, very soon, AI has to be integrated, so that if patient monitoring is seeing some abnormality happening in any of the vitals, automatically it sends a signal to ventilator to get into a right mode to support. From there, it might trigger to syringe pump to give a right doses, a right flow of which medicine has to be given. So there's a lot needs to be done. So those areas to bring in a price regulation is very hard also. It's very complex. But I definitely believe that somewhere a very right, thoughtful process has to be there to bring all that in the cost consideration. What some time back we heard from Shravan is that cost of those imported machines are high, and our challenge in India is that our treatment cost, our diagnostic cost is very low. I mean, let's accept it. You get a CT done for $25. Nowhere it is less than $400, $300 for a brain CT. Now, if that is a low cost, you have to have a more and more patient needs to be covered there. So this is a challenge what we have, and which is good. I mean, today we feel that it is expensive, but if you really go across the world, we are probably the lowest in terms of cost. But very good thing which is happening is through Ayushman Bharat, that even people who were not at all getting covered, they are now getting covered, and about 500 million people are, getting biggest insurance, global biggest insurance is Ayushman Bharat. Right. That is also triggering a lot of medical device consumption, because it's becoming a hub and spoke. Small places.
Okay. Let me take some of the thoughts, Mr. Khurana, and go across to Dr. Shravan, because Dr. Shravan, you brought up that point about, actually there are numerous aspects that we've discussed, technology, costs, dependence on imports, in-house R&D, and, this whole proposal of creating this National Medical Device Authority, which is being proposed. Do you think this kind of an authority could really help resolve some of the issues that we've heard on the show today, and perhaps create that kind of ecosystem where we have one cohesive body which is looking at all these myriad issues?
Absolutely, because there are so many nuances here. You take all the regulatory requirements. Our medical devices are regulated under the DCGI for certain areas, and various other departments, the Environment Ministry, and so many departments get involved. Second, when it comes to investment, we have multiple sources of investment and opportunities. Again, you mentioned the technology, medical device parks. These are also opportunities. I think Sunil was mentioning something about investing and about licensing or bringing in technology. And Girish also touched on that. Until and unless we are able to develop our own IP and expand our portfolio and evolve with the system, it's not going to be very sustainable. So just as we have a production-linked incentive, if we had something like an innovation-linked incentive, that would encourage us to put in more effort towards developing products that are well-suited for the Indian market, as well as eventually can be expanded for export also. The other thing is, Paramita, it's not just the hardware components. We also have opportunities. Today, a lot of healthcare is being offered remotely. COVID has taught us that we can operate an intensive care unit in another facility, in fact, in another state even. We're seeing robotic surgeries being performed remotely. So as we are, as the very definition of healthcare service providers are being called into question, we need to evolve with that. Today, we have technologies like 5G entering the telecom space, and we're able to transact data at such large speeds. Could we potentially in future have devices which are moving with you and able to connect to the hospital or to your healthcare provider who might be sitting at home? And to that, I think the answer is definitely yes, but we need to put in some investment and effort into making that possible and making it sustainable, and also training the people to be able to operate these equipment, because it's not just about getting these sophisticated equipment across to the market. Who's going to use it? Who's going to operate it? A lot of this is going to be even consumer driven eventually. And everything that we are doing is for the patient, right? To empower the patient, to provide them with the knowledge. So we do need to take this technology and make it more democratic, make it more accessible.
Indeed. Girish, how do you respond? I mean, do you think the biggest lacuna right now is on having a cohesive regulation and regulatory body? Do you think that could be a key fill-up needed?
Absolutely, Paramita. In fact, the regulatory body today, for example, Shavan brought it up about CDSO. And see, today, if you take an IVD space or the imaging space, the ability for our regulator to get prepared with the infrastructure and the sample to be done for the clinical trials, which is very, very rudimentary. We are in a very early stage. Of course, we have a lot of regulations and a lot of methods. The process is there, but the quality and the rigor, which is is a big gap there. I certainly believe that this medical device authority and the focus here and building this capacity and capability. And also the last point, which is India is lacking in this space is, for example, we try to validate and certify a product based on the existing or the old gold standards. If you really want to push the envelope and make India to go forward with the new technology and new science, for every new science and new technology, you cannot compare the old technology and old science and certify. And so this is one of the very critical things which government need to consider, that for every new product we are trying to come in, what is the science, what is the technology which we are bringing in? It is not just a re-engineering here. If we really need to become a global leader, and if we need to make in India for the global, we need to really think that how do new science we can bring it in, how this new science can be validated and clinical trial can be done and certified. And that has to be a new standard we have to evolve. I'll close it there.
Indeed. And I think you've touched upon the issue of standards, and really we need to have that kind of perhaps consistency as far as standards are also concerned. In fact, let's just head towards closing comments, because this is a government which has listened closely. We've seen a lot of policy initiatives which have come in. There's a lot of initiatives being taken by private companies as well in terms of that key partnerships along with Indian grown multinationals that we've heard of. So I'd like at this point in time to really understand in terms of key asks. Sunil Khurana, let me start with you, since yours is a domestic manufacturer, and that's what we also want to see more of when it comes to medical devices industry. What will it take, you think, in order for many more such BPL medical devices companies to come up in our country and to service the market?
So I would divide it into three categories. First category is that, let's build the planned skill development. This is a one area where government is working, and we are also partnering at many places. Institutes like IISc or IITs are working, but other engineering institutes, we have to have some direction coming and some curriculum change that manufacturing becomes a more attractive. So this is the one area which I think is very key. Second is financials. I mean, any industry will always ask for financials. I don't want to really only look at financial, but PLI is a great scheme. But what it should happen is that companies like us is not even getting qualified in that. Those ceilings are kept very high. Those criteria should be brought to a level where companies like us or even smaller companies are also benefited. I'm setting up a factory, new factory, and we know that whatever we do, we'll not be able to get benefit from that. So that's the one area which government should definitely look at, not only for us, for many more. R&D is key. Unless you have a local R&D and your own technology, it's very hard. Somewhere, some incentive or some support to maybe pick up 50-60% of R&D team cost, very helpful, would be a very interesting. And something which I'm going to now say is, for a very short term, raise the custom duties. I mean, you have to really, today at a very low cost, products are being made in China because they get an electronics component locally. Our silicon revolution is going to take time. Electronics component is going to take still more time, which will be very affordable. Maybe till 3 to 5 years, the products which are made here, if Sharon is making here CT scanner, why should CT scanner be permitted to bring? There are countries who have taken a very tough call. So, some kind of entry barrier of those products, then we all will get more alert, we'll get a little bit more stressed to do all of that. And the last point is medical device under new vertical. That focused approach is going to make a big difference. And it is not that it is not happening, but the moment you have a dedicated ministry or dedicated body with a deep understanding, there it will get right. So these are the few points which I want to just cover here as a close.
Right. So focus exclusively on medical devices. Don't club it in with other industries, and of course, get young talent to be more attracted into manufacturing rather than going straight away into the IT space. Those are some of the asks, and of course, much more. Girish, if I can come to you, how would you respond? Whether it is in terms of a manufacturer or even in terms of looking at the domestic market, what do you think are those major steps that really need to be undertaken now? Because it could be a case of now is perhaps the best time to act. I mean, we know China is under a bit of a glare. We are in the post-pandemic new learnings curve, and healthcare is perhaps the topmost priority it's ever been for countries, and our own included.
See, first of all, I would look at there are two aspects of it. One is from the demand aspect of it and supply aspect of it. From the supply aspect of it, this is an opportunity where the Indian companies can certainly become a global player. The current, the improvement in the government regulation and the ecosystem and the industry collaboration, all of it to focus on how do India can make a quality product in this space. India is never considered to be a country where we can produce quality product for the global market, except few odd cases like a GE, Medtronics, and all of them come to India, bring their science and technology and started developing. So we need to look at how we will develop the science and technology and manufacture in India for the global market, which has got a lot of dependency over global regulation. So the Indian government has to really think through why the Indian product, what we produce, how the government, Indian authorities approach this is not recognized by WHO or FDA or any other standard. So we need to push our envelope and make our product quality better, our standards better, regulation better, so that our product can go to global market. That is from the overall how the Indian companies can sustain and succeed in a long-term period. In a short term, our Indian healthcare problem has got a very focused and very specific problems we have. We have a problem of TB, we have a problem of cancer, we have a problem of lifestyle diseases. Shravan mentioned about non-communicable diseases. We can clearly focus how do we really solve this problem and what kind of medical devices we need to produce and manufacture with the high quality with the Indian cost or what the Indian public can afford, both in the public health system as well as in the private health system. That's the second important focus. If you do this right for next to 3 to 5 years, along with the government, along with coming up with the proper policies, guidelines, and investment like an SZZ kind of a model, certainly we can in 3 to 5 years time, this industry can exponentially grow, not only for India, for the global market.
Right. Thank you, Girish, for that, the long and the short of it in terms of the nuts and bolts which are required. And we also heard from Sunil Khurana. Final word from you, Dr. Shravan, in terms of both the short-term as well as the long-term goals that need to be taken, whether it is on the policy front or whether it is by manufacturers such as yourself to really put India in the medical devices spotlight.
Paramita, I think in the short term, if we're looking at boosting local manufacturing, we definitely need to increase our self-reliance and make and boost demand. Right, that could come through, for example, public-private partnerships, which are already in play. We need to boost local demand to make it more attractive for people. As Sunil and Girish said, we need to make it more attractive for people to get into medtech manufacturing, and that is a function of demand. Probably in the medium term, we need to continue to boost the medtech parks and provide more incentives towards high-end medical devices and eventually reduce our import requirements. I think we've already called this out. We need to have a predictable policy regime, and I believe we are making the right, we're going in the right direction towards that end. As we grow, as we mature as an industry, you take a look at what's happening in the pharmaceutical or automotive sector. They've also had a lot of incentives towards exports. So in the medium to long term, we need to see how we can boost exports and be competitive on a technology as well as cost basis, whether it's a China or any other country. We need to be seen on par with some of the best. Last and certainly not the least, if we want to establish brand India on the world map, we need to have some world-class clinical practices. We need to have training. both in the engineering field as well as the medical field. Safety, quality, all these need to come into play to proudly put a stamp of Make in India, for India, as well as in India for the world, Paramita. Thank you so much.
Well, that wraps up this special discussion that we've had with some fantastic insights. And thank you to our speakers, Dr. Shravan Subramaniam of Wipro GE Healthcare, Dr. Sarjanand Prasad Singh, President IMA, Sunil Khurana, CEO and MD at BPL Medical Devices, and Girish Krishnamurthy, MD and CEO at Tata Medical Diagnostics. And now let's step into our next discussion, which is health tech enabling precision healthcare. And precision healthcare is the need of the hour, with non-communicable diseases accounting for 60% of deaths. And this outcome can be vastly improved if we use newer technologies such as precision healthcare and AI solutions, which truly have the ability to transform patient care pathway. And the pandemic, as we saw, accelerated the use of technology in the form of teleconsultations, remote monitoring to unprecedented levels. It's now time to move forward with improved connectivity and streamlined healthcare networks. The Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission is a step in that direction, which will allow faster access to information and more accurate predictive modeling. Furthermore, the introduction of 5G enables greater connectivity across healthcare ecosystems. So in this discussion, we'll be probing the mind of industry leaders to learn how technology can help India's healthcare ecosystem towards precision healthcare. And to discuss that, we have with us on the show today, Girish Raghavan, Vice President Engineering at GE Healthcare, Dr. R.S. Sharma, CEO, National Health Authority, Dr. H.S. Chabra, Indian Spinal Injury Center, Dr. H. Sudarshan Balal, Chairman, Medical Advisory Board, Manipal Hospitals Group, Professor Dr. Rajiv Dasgupta, Chairperson, CSMCH, JNU, and Managing Editor, Indian Journal of Public Health, Dr. K. Hariprasad, President of Hospitals Division at Apollo Hospitals. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time out and to discuss really the topic of the hour, which is how do we improve India's healthcare system, particularly with the use of medical technology and the new devices and the precision care which is available. Dr. Sharma, let me start with you. And as the CEO of the National Health Authority, which was an umbrella body which has been created by the government to really oversee all the initiatives which are there, take us through really how a body such as yours, and what are the initiatives which have been undertaken by the government to really ensure that India is right at the cusp of using the right medical technology in order to make healthcare accessible, affordable, and available to our very large population?
I think what we at the National Health Authority are doing, we are implementing a project called Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission. The basic idea of this project is to ensure high adoption and leveraging of technology to deliver health services in an affordable, ubiquitous, and quality manner. So essential idea is that how do we create a framework wherein we can use all applications, diverse applications, and as you yourself have said that it's a very fragmented kind of market. Yes, it is, but nevertheless, we don't want everybody to use the same application, but we certainly want everybody to integrate that application so that they can talk to each other. So what we are doing in the ABDM is creating a framework. We have a number of building blocks which actually enable the creation of a digital health infrastructure in the country. But some of these are, one is the personal health records of each individual. So basically we are creating Ayushman Bharat health account like a bank account for each person in this country, where he or she can store his or her health records and create a longitudinal health history. That's number one. Similarly, we are creating an authenticated registry of health facilities, health professionals, and drugs. And we are creating a consent mechanism whereby I can share my health records and data with my doctor, with my pharmacist, etc., so as to get these services or the medicines. So this is how we are creating that interoperable framework. We are also creating something called Unified Health Interface, similar to the unified payment interface, whereby I can transfer in a UPI, I can transfer money from any bank to any bank, any person to any person. Similarly, in the UHI, I should be able to have talk to any video consultation application from any other application, and I should be able to search, I should be able to book, and I should be able to avail the facilities. So this is essentially a framework which actually seeks to integrate through a common protocol all kinds of diverse applications, so that we are able to create an a scalable, interoperable, frugal, and for a population of 1.3 billion, so that inclusive architecture for the digital health system of the country.
And indeed, that goal is is much required, as you said, sir. And let me go across to a private sector player and somebody who's been in the country for many years. Of course, from GE Healthcare, we have Girish Raghavan. Girish, hearing these initiatives and really this mission to integrate, provide a common framework, and all the steps that are being taken by the central government. How does it align with really the paradoxes that we see in the Indian healthcare system, where we have the latest technology available in urban areas, but yet the basic facilities are not available just a few kilometers outside of our urban cities?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you, Paramita, for the opportunity to be part of this panel discussion. But before I answer your question, I would like to step back a bit and talk about some of the challenges we are facing as a healthcare industry today. Right? So the industry today as a whole is grappling with, I would say, 4 fundamental issues. Right? First is, as you told in your introduction, right, we have a major issue with capacity and access. So every year we have several thousands of people who are getting into the middle class, but we don't have the propensity to for them to access the healthcare facility what we have today within the country. So that is definitely an issue with access and capacity, where we have people from tier 2, tier 3 cities moving to a larger city for medical treatment, so on and so forth. The second issue we are facing in the industry is about cost and productivity, right? As you know, there's a lot of medical waste happening. It could be because of wrong diagnosis, delayed diagnosis, delayed treatment. So healthcare is a pretty complex subject. And if you look at the global numbers, right, we are talking about something like 20% of the healthcare expense in certain OECD countries is actually healthcare, I would say, waste, right? The third big issue, which is predominantly for the Indian market, is the availability of trained experts or technicians or technologists or radiologists, right, who are the operators of this healthcare ecosystem, right? So the staff and patient experience is a major challenge today. And as a consequence, you're finding that the limited staff we have today, they get too much of cases coming on a daily basis. And as a consequence, they have burnouts, right? Professional burnouts is a norm, what we're seeing today. And the last one, the fourth biggest issue, is outcomes, right? Medical errors. Especially if you look at US today, the third largest cause of death in the US is medical errors. It just follows cardiovascular diseases and oncology and cancer, right? So this is the larger problem what we're facing today. And if you look at the paradox what you're referring to, we have on one end, tier 1 cities, right? We have the best of the best medical equipments and technologies and physicians and clinicians. And then you go to a tier 3 city, we are seeing there's a huge want of proper healthcare. And this is precisely where, Paramita, we're expecting digital to play a huge role, right? With the government rolling out the 5G infrastructure today, we expect the 5G infrastructure to significantly reduce the gap we are seeing today between these two worlds in the healthcare ecosystem. So that is definitely one. The second thing is the whole concept of healthcare expertise what we have today, right? So for example, today what happens is, if you have a technician or a technologist sitting in a tier 1 city and you want to operate a medical equipment sitting in a tier 3 city, it's impossible today. So using all the digital technologies we have, which is going to be about virtual care, video calls what we have, right? Even if you look at some of the technologies we have for remote patient monitoring. So today it's possible that a patient would be in a tier 3 city. He goes back after a large procedure. He goes to his hometown, and through remote patient monitoring, a doctor sitting in a tier 1 hospital can monitor the patient constantly and can give advices and so on and so forth. So in the entire thing, if you ask me what is going to bridge the gap between the two worlds we have, one is infrastructure, and second is the digital technology, which is going to help us to reduce the gap significantly.
And some very important points. Let me bring in Dr. Balal here, since he's helming the Manipal group of hospitals, which is perhaps one of the largest healthcare networks that we have in the country today. And, physician access, a point raised by Girish, is clearly a big issue. But at the same time, the government is trying to enable a technology framework. How do you see it from a hospital end in terms of physician access? I mean, India has dismal numbers. I think one physician per 1,000 population, or it could be even more adverse. How is technology going to be a game changer? How have you been using it at the group?
I would like to go back to the COVID pandemic for a minute, if you allow me. Though the unprecedented, devastating, once-in-a-lifetime COVID pandemic completely uprooted us, turned our world upside down, there were some silver linings in the cloud. In addition to making epidemiology, public health, vaccinations, preventive medicine an important part of our healthcare, it did give a huge impetus to digital technology, teleconsultations, artificial intelligence, remote monitoring, e-pharmacy, e-labs, etc., and also made the home care possible, outpatient care possible, and freed a lot of valuable, precious hospital beds for the really, really sick. And it also helped us give special care to the elderly.
So much more that needs to be done. And we just heard about one of the issues about really accessing the right talent and people who can use some of these latest medical technology devices and really use the kind of framework that you're setting up. And that seems to be a cry. Access to talent seems to be a war cry amongst most healthcare companies. How is the government proposing to partner in this endeavor? How can we ease up this sort of talent crunch?
See, I'll begin where my previous panelists left. And now what we are doing is essentially creating an interoperable environment whereby if I have, let's say, Arogya Setu, which is an end user application, and somebody has got a Practo application at the doctor's side, they should be able to talk to each other. So essentially, we are creating an interoperable teleconsultation situation, which will ensure that whatever device I may have, whatever application I may have, whatever application doctor may have, we will be able to talk to each other. Similar to a telecommunication world where if I have a Vodafone phone and you have a Airtel phone, I just dial you and I am able to communicate with you. I don't have to bother as to which company's connection I have got or somebody else whom I am talking to have got. So that interoperability is very important. Inclusion is very important. I'll give you another example, COVID. Now, COVID we designed essentially during this period of pandemic for vaccination. Now, imagine if COVID was not there, then we would have had a very chaotic situation in the country in terms of vaccination. COVID actually, in a way, digitized the entire vaccination so that I can have first vaccine in Delhi and second one in Trivandrum, and there's no problem. My entire data is portable, available throughout the country. And then we design it in such a manner that there are 150 applications which are actually plugging into COVID. So essential idea is technologies for a country like ours have to be designed and developed in a manner that they are scalable because we are 1.4 billion. They are also interoperable because we have 26 languages, in this country, the constitutionally approved languages, 26 of them, and we have got hundreds and thousands of dialects. So we should be able to create that situation whereby nobody is left out. Digital haves are not left out, and digital have-nots are not left out. So these are some of the things which we have to create. So it's a design, consideration. These things must not be an afterthought in actually developing technology architecture. And I think many of these things, for example, teleconsultation has optimized the way a person from remote, corner in the country is able to talk to somebody in All India Institute of Medical Science. So in a way, it has increased the access to the kind of availability of the doctor. I understand there is a crunch, there is a number, issue relating to the availability of the professionals, which cannot be solved in a day. Nevertheless, technology can enable that, in a way, in a short run. And of course, one is increasing the number of seats in the medical colleges, number of, nurses which are being trained, that numbers are increasing. But then it will take a little while to kind of come to that level. In the meanwhile, we can use technologies to redress some of these problems.
Okay, I think Dr. Chabra wants to come in at this point in time from Indian Spinal Injury Center, which is a well-known hospital in the capital city. Go ahead, Dr. Chabra.
Yeah, I think there's a great promise now in improvement in healthcare, both availability, accessibility, affordability, with telemedicine, as we have been discussing about. Telemedicine is not something new. In fact, it has been there since a long time. For example, in Queensland, in Australia, they set up a telepediatric referral services using telemedicine way back in 2000. And then in UK also, there's a fracture service which is recognized by the British Orthopedic Association, and they are advocating that all routine follow-ups should not be in person, but could be through telemedicine. Similarly, in Singapore, there is MyDoc. But with the COVID, this gained a lot of increased use per se across the country also. But there are various things we need to work upon in order to tap the potential to the maximum. Of course, we now have also the telemedicine guidelines. But if we were to go as per the guidelines, the first visit can't be through a teleconsultation. There are restrictions in the medications that you can prescribe. So there are a number of other issues also which need to be looked into. But one of the main limitations which are there in telemedicine is the ability to examine in person, right? So unless you examine a person, you can't just manage a person based on the history. But that too can be bypassed if we set up, like in Queensland, we set up various satellite clinics where there is a doctor who is not specialized but can be in touch with the specialist in a central area.
Dr. Chabra, your point is well taken. Telemedicine has clearly been something that has taken a huge lift off thanks to the pandemic and of course before that as well, and it can be structured in various ways. But that's not the only aspect or gains for medical technology. Girish, you wanted to come in here because we're talking also about precision healthcare, where we are making diagnosis early. We are trying to save on the costs of taking tertiary care treatment from those early diagnoses as well. What else would you like to add in terms of the potential that MedTech has to offer?
Yeah, but coming to precision health, and I want to just take a minute to demystify precision health, right? So what is precision health? It's basically better outcomes delivered more efficiently. It's as simple as that, right? And today, if you look at precision health, there are two aspects of precision health, right? One is the purely clinical aspect, which is what we call precision medicine. Then we have the operational path, which is called precision care. A combination of these, you need both the clinical aspect as well as the operational aspect, the care part of it, together to what we call precision health. So if you look at the way the various care areas are evolving in the space of precision health, be it oncology or cardiology and so on and so forth, I would break this precision health into three distinct buckets, right? One is the whole focus on precision diagnostics, which will actually help in making good decisions for a clinician. It involves both in vivo and in vitro part of diagnostics. Then I would talk about the precision therapeutics part, which is more focused on delivery. And the last would be the monitoring. After your therapy, the person goes back home, right? And you have precision monitoring, which is all what we were talking just before the previous panelist about telehealth and acute care and so on and so forth, right? So these three all working together in conjunction towards the clinical care pathway is what would be precision health. Now, coming to your question about the enablers, which is where the medtech companies play a big role, right? How do we enable precision health? I would break this into three distinct buckets. One, the devices, what we have has to be smart, right? We're talking about smart devices. Maybe it's a CT or an MR or a BP monitoring equipment, whatever it is, right? A device should be intelligent enough where we use technologies like AI, which will be able to process a lot of data and give very concrete outcomes, right? To give an example, Paramita, if you look at a CT system from GE, right? We would be able to process all the records from the patient, and we'll be able to recommend to the technologist saying, for this patient, given his history, given the person's parameter, okay, we recommend these two protocols to be used, which is one of the most complex thing. We will have 150 to 2,000 protocols in a CT scanner. And the system is so intelligent, it can go and tell the technician what to do. As again, the technologist calling somebody to figure it out, right? It could even be as simple as you're an MR scan. The scanner would, once the scan is complete, the scanner would tell the technologist, look, the patient has moved quite a bit, maybe you should do a rescan. So we're trying to build a lot of smartness in the device. So the device would tell the technologist what to do rather than the technologist telling the device what to do. So that's one. The second part is the advanced applications what we have, right? Today, with all the startups we have, we are trying to see how these startups with the distinct capability what they have, could be genomics, could be imaging, could be pathology, you name it, right? How we can take them together and provide clinical care, which can be highly effective. And the last bucket, the third pillar would be the digitally enabled services and solutions, right? Like how to use digital predominantly to make sure that the operational efficiency is fully intact for the entire hospital center. So precision medicine or precision health, it's a combination of all these three elements coming together, Paramita.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for sort of illuminating that, because I think a lot of us perhaps aren't clear on the layperson side. Dr. Hariprasad of Apollo Hospitals, which is again one of the largest groups in the country. I mean, how do you respond and really react, whether it is from startups who are competing with perhaps some of the facilities like that hospitals such as yours are offering, or even some of the technology enablers? What have you seen in terms of the incremental benefits?
Yeah, before I come to that, I'd like to add on to something what Girish said about precision medicine. I think the future of healthcare is all about precision, and I can relate it to it very closely. About 6 years ago, I was diagnosed to have acute promyelocytic leukemia, which is a type of blood cancer. And I was admitted in the hospital, and I was told to wait. I was wondering, I was meant to wait for 2 days without any treatment. I was wondering why they were doing it. And then they came back to me and said, there are 2 options for treatment. We've done the genetic analysis of your bone marrow. And one is the routine chemotherapy, where there is the toxicity like cardiomyotoxicity, you lose your hair, and the regular stuff that follows chemotherapy. And the second option is high dose of vitamin A and arsenic. So I asked them one very simple question. What are the comparative outcomes between the 2 options? And they showed me publications which said that the outcomes of both are similar. So then I chose the second option, obviously, because I didn't want to go through the regular side effects of chemotherapy and the cardiac toxicity. And believe me, by the end of the first dose of the chemotherapy, the genetic variation which had set in was corrected, and they actually diagnosed it at the molecular level. So that was actually something which really saved my life without going through chemotherapy. And I don't know what would have happened if I had gone through chemotherapy with the side effects and all that was associated with it. So I think precision medicine, this is a great example of precision medicine, and precision medicine is going to be the future, not just in treatment of cancer, but across the healthcare spectrum. Now, coming to technology, I think COVID has created a huge boom in technology. And COVID has, opened up multiple spaces. And telemedicine, as everybody was speaking about, teleconsultation has become just one aspect of telemedicine today. I remember during the COVID days, it taught us to innovate, it taught us to do new things, it taught us to think out of the box to create solutions. There was a hospital in the Northeast, and they had no doctors there. Somebody had donated some equipment for COVID management there, but there was no doctor there to manage. They had only a couple of nurses, but there were a lot of sick patients there. So what we did is we quickly set up a system there, and we created a tele-ICU, and we actually started monitoring sick patients from there and helping the local nurses to treat the patients, and the outcomes were comparable. So tele-ICU, telepathology, teleradiology, so multiple new things have come into the field, and they're here to stay. And today EICU, which started off as a need during the COVID situation, has become one of the regular offerings of many of the large hospitals.
Right. We take your point that clearly technology can be used as in a way to give a fill up to perhaps the lack of adequate trained personnel that we have in the medical field to address the kind of volumes. And India, of course, always sets an unprecedented scale. And of course, before I proceed, would just like to salute you, Dr. Hariprasad, as a cancer survivor, and thank you for sharing your story of survival and how medical precision helped you in your treatment. Let me come to Dr. Rajiv Dasgupta, because Professor Dasgupta, you've been patiently listening to everyone's point of view. And of course, we all know India is always a land of paradoxes, but what works in the rest of the world didn't always work in India. Solutions are always very different in terms of what's happening in our country. But the problem is only growing when it comes to healthcare. Share with us your thoughts in terms of precision technology and how it can address and resolve some of the problems we face.
Yes, of course, India is a land of paradoxes. One big divide in India, of course, in the Indian healthcare system, of course, as we know, is the rural-urban divide, with about 2/3 of hospital beds in the urban area for 1/3 of the population that's urban. But beyond that, in terms of human resources, and healthcare is indeed extremely resource intensive, notwithstanding the technological advances, which of course are reduced to some extent. But in the rural health services today, the shortage of specialists is to the tune of 80%. Now, technology can only fill it up to a point, because specialists in the urban areas, whether they are in the private sector or in the public sector, we know are overstretched also. Second, precision medicine, of course, is the thing of the future, if not of the present to a certain extent. It's indeed what we need to aspire for. And technology can hopefully make it a lot more available and accessible than it is at present. But that's going to be an uphill task, certainly. Even in the urban areas, with the National Urban Health Mission putting in a lot of focus, still even physician shortages is to the extent of 10%. So human resource is something which is really, human resource shortage is something which is really mind-boggling. And to what extent can technology bridge that gap? To a certain extent, yes, but greater public investment is certainly necessary in the public sector, in the public health services per se, to make this available, to make this technological or the unprecedented technological advances available. And as a doctor myself, I would certainly pitch for that. The other thing to keep in mind is that what COVID has shown us very effectively is the role of the public sector. And what Dr. R.S. Sharma said at the outset about the COVID app, about the COVID vaccine experience, that, if anything, has underscored the relevance of the public sector, which had actually been dwindling to some extent in the last couple of decades, in line with some of the major structural changes in governance and policy. So how do we build in fund infusion into the public sector, and therefore make this technology available and accessible to a lot more than that's available at present? And in order to do that, one final point to remember, while the private sector as a whole provides a whole lot of healthcare to the Indian population, the out-of-pocket expenditure, the inexorably high out-of-pocket expenditure notwithstanding, the private sector in India is actually extremely heterogeneous. A lot of it is under-regulated, if not completely unregulated. Formal players are really very few, despite a fair amount of corporatization that's been happening. And therefore, addressing the digital health mission for this very, very large, under-regulated or unregulated, both formal and informal private sector is going to be a key challenge in the coming years.
And in fact, let me go across to Dr. Sharma to really address this, because the challenge is huge. I began with the statement that the industry is very fragmented. You are creating a common sort of a platform as far as a data repository, for instance, and we saw its success with COVID. But how do you address and respond to some of the challenges that have been raised by Professor Dasgupta and the other speakers?
I completely agree with Professor Dasgupta that there are huge challenges, especially for the smaller hospitals and clinics and single doctor maybe Dr. Couple clinics. Digitization is a big challenge there. But I think what we are doing here is something very interesting. We are creating, a number of digital public goods which will be used free of cost by, these smaller clinics. So, for example, for the larger hospital chains, you have what is called the Hospital Management Information System, HMIS, which actually, does the entire management and creation of digital records and scheduling and other kinds of things. Similarly, we are creating, let's say, a free application for the smaller doctors, because the whole idea is that once you start digitizing this space, which is so heterogeneous, but in a way you digitize it and then make it patient-centric, in the sense that if I went to a small hospital today and I went to another hospital after 3 days, my records must be available to me as and when I want them. And therefore, I think creating technologies and creating applications which actually are user-friendly, which are doctor-friendly, which are patient-friendly, and which can, interoperably interchange the records, and creating a protocol for interchange of these records will be something which is required. But I completely agree that it is not something which can be done overnight. It will require a very, very, because, for example, digitization in United States, digitization in Europe, etc., it has taken decades together. And it is not complete. And therefore, I also agree that it will take some time.
Dr. Hari Prasad, would you like to add to this? How do you respond and how do you react to what Dr. Sharma is saying in terms of really creating a homogeneous data pool which is interoperable, for instance, between hospitals? Today, that is not possible, or rather that is not being implemented. It's quite a headache, in fact, both for patients and doctors alike.
I think we are at the right time. The COVID period actually demonstrated India's capability to respond to a challenge. I think the simple example Dr. Sharma spoke about, the COVID app, it is all about public-private partnership. A huge segment of tertiary care is in the private sector, and a lot of regulations and a lot of infrastructure is available is with the public sector. So ideal public-private partnership is something which is critical and which has the potential to propel India into the future. And just to give you the example, I don't think any other country, or even in India, in any other situation, we would have had 2 vaccines for COVID approved within such a short period. And the ability to do it, and actually having done it, saved so many thousands and millions of lives in the country. So I think the real answer to all this, whether it's killing or technology, whatever is the problem, the good public-private partnership will propel us into the future much faster than we think it can happen.
Girish, what are going to be the strategic pillars for you at GE going forward, especially when it comes to digital innovation?
So if you look at GE's strategy on digital, has been revolving around what we call the Edison strategy, right? So Edison is basically, as some of you might be knowing, is the core of the digital's backbone for GE Healthcare. So essentially, if you ask me to give an analogy of Edison, it is more like the operating system you have in your iPhone, okay, or on your Android phone, right? Basically, the base operating system. So what we have been trying to do to solve some of the industry problems you are facing is to build a very comprehensive set of a platform on which you could have a lot of applications sitting on. So what do we get? We get much faster access to technology. We provide set of services which will help third-party applications and startups to accelerate their pace of development, right? Because the platform provides a set of services which is so comprehensive that it will help third-party applications to build oncology applications or whatever, or cardiology applications and so on and so forth. So if you look at the core strategy of building the Edison, is going to be very comprehensive for us. That is one. The second thing we are also working towards very strongly, Paramita, is to see how we can aggregate information in a much more collaborative manner. So today, one of the challenges, I think Dr. Sharma mentioned about it initially, about the longitudinal patient access. So if you look at that specifically, you have today data in a very fragmented mechanism. So you have data in multiple imaging systems, right? You have pathology information, you have genomic information, you have CT scans, X-ray scans, so on and so forth. So what we are trying to do today is to build a platform through which you can aggregate information coming from disparate sources, right? And you're trying to provide a much more, I would say, comprehensive and consolidated view. So our strategy in digital has been, one, to build a very solid foundation, the platform, what we call the Edison platform, on which the third-party applications can accelerate development. And the second is to build a platform through which you can aggregate data from multiple sources and provide a longitudinal patient pathway or a patient jacket in a much more simpler manner.
And is your platform going to be integrated with the government's platform as well?
The actions we are working towards, and Dr. Sharma is aware of this, we've been working with this organization, is to see how, basically what Dr. Sharma has been putting together is the backbone of India's healthcare ecosystem, right? It is like a backbone, and every vendor or every hospital has to join that particular backbone. So we are providing, we'll be enabling that functionality where we'll be able to get onto the platform in a much more seamless manner.
So that's a real life example of really a public-private partnership, and I'm sure there are very many more. Dr. Chabra, what are going to be your sort of key focus areas when it comes to medtech, when it comes to precision technology, both from a patient as well as a healthcare provider perspective?
Yeah, Dr. Hari Prasad and then Dr. Das Gupta talked about precision medicine, and they talked about genetic tests in order to individualize treatment. I would just want to say that that is one part of this emerging concept of precision medicine, which takes into account individual variability within groups of people in response to treatment. So other than genes, it is also environment and lifestyle which is important. And there comes the role of collecting data. I think one of the greatest potentials of Ayushman Bharat digital mission and digitization is the ability to collect data from across the country and then have precision medicine come in where you individualize treatment for groups of people and see it is not only efficacy but also safety which comes into concern when we develop this individualized treatment. So right. You would be aware that in US there is the All of Us research program where they are aiming at collecting data from 1 million US inhabitants, their genetic information, their biological samples, and all information pertaining to their diseases so that they can come out with a better understanding of the underlying mechanisms for various diseases so that they can then come up with improved approaches of preventing and diagnosing and treatment of diseases. And in all this, integration of health records comes in very handy. So digitalization tomorrow and advanced technology will help in also overcoming the challenges that we've been talking about, accessibility, affordability, availability, because we will be able to improve the treatment for all stages of the society.
You're saying integration is really the need of the hour to really integrate all these silos that exist, especially when it comes to all the data which is residing across institutions and across platforms. Okay, quickly closing comments, Dr. Dasgupta. Clearly, the landscape is huge. And as Professor Dr. Sharma said, it is going to take a long time for India to really get up there with, say, the US or the Europes of the world in terms of digitization. But what do you think we need to focus on? Because in terms of the key priority areas.
Well, what we need to focus on is the UHC targets of 2030. On some of these, we are on track. The Niti Aayog, for example, is tracking it state by state. And on some things, we are lagging. I think we should take heart from what Dr. Sharma is pointing out, that it is indeed possible to leapfrog on some of the dimensions on which we are lagging in some senses. At the same time, the other ball on which we should also keep our eye, where digital health is a focus area. There is a lot of possibility of global cooperation, and India can certainly demonstrate what it's possible to do, even despite these challenges. And this North-South collaboration that G20 offers can actually be a beacon for some of the South-South partnerships.
Right. That's a great point that we can actually take this to a global scale. Dr. Balal, for you at the group? What's going to be your key focus area?
Well, I think public-private partnership has shown to be a great boon in the COVID era. That should certainly continue. And I think one size doesn't fit all, as has been pointed out by my previous speaker. I think we have to tailor not only diagnostics, but also therapy. And I think we should look at more and more of remote monitoring, both for communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases.
Final word to you, Dr. Sharma. I mean, you've heard some initiatives that private players are wanting to take, including what we heard from Girish of GE Healthcare, of really giving you, platforms where you can accumulate all that data. A final word in terms of data privacy. We've seen a lot of your public institutions coming under attack. You've got a lot of data that you want to accumulate, but also in terms of security of that data. Perhaps a final word in terms of your key priorities.
No, I think one thing which I would like to clarify rather than, priority is that the concept that the government is accumulating a lot of data is absolutely fallacious. See, what we are building is essentially we are building a highway where the data can travel from one place to another place and as and when required in a standardized form, which is FHIR, nowadays the exact standard in the health space. That is what we are doing. The data stays where it is created. If I have visited Apollo, the data of my records will stay in Apollo. But of course, as Apollo is participating in that program, what it will mean is that the patient will be able to access data from various health service providers where he or she has visited, and basically will be able to visualize on his or her device and will be able to share with the doctor. So essential idea is it is not as if the government of India is going to accumulate a lot of data, because that will basically mean a huge amount of data security architecture which we will have to put in place. That's not correct. What is also being done is that this entire framework, the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, which we are creating, is privacy preserving, privacy by design. How it is ensured is that it is the patient who basically gives the consent. So this is based on a complete consent architecture. And as soon as he gives consent, we have a system where we just don't keep the data, but we do keep the links which are linked to the Ayushman Bharat health account, whereby that person's data, wherever it is residing, is able to be kind of presented before him, and then he can share with somebody else. That's one part. The priority wise, I would say that the sooner we digitize this entire space, then I think that will be the best way, because the person will be able to create longitudinal health record. Diagnosis will become much better. We will be able to utilize anonymized data for policy making. We will be able to do a lot of predictive analysis, and a lot of side effects and a lot of these dividends will flow out of the entire digital process which will happen. And I must also add that we are not going the way US and Europe have gone. We are from the beginning itself, we are in a very, very democratic way, democratizing the access, democratizing, it's not something like that the big tech is going to have, in them. It's every player will be able to participate in this process without any entry barriers. That's my take.
Well, that's a wrap on the special webinar of GE Healthcare and Moneycontrol present New Horizons 2.0, where we've explored the length and breadth of the healthcare industry in India, right from how medical technology or medtech can really change the landscape when it comes to diagnosis and treatment of patients in a country of our size, and of course, how to spur medical devices and manufacturing of such devices in our country to make sure that India is amongst the top markets in the world. We hope you've gained some important insights from today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us.
CNBC TV18 Moneycontrol, New Horizon 2.0, presented by GE.